Hi, my name is Jess and welcome to my channel, Have a Book at This. Today I'm going to be filming for you my March 2016 wrap-up video. In the month of March I read 4 books, which isn't bad, you know, it's like an average of 1 a weekish. I would have liked to get a few more in there, but some of the ones that I did read this month were long so I can excuse myself on that account. But I thoroughly enjoyed every book I read this month, so let me just share them with you. So the first book I read this month was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which I don't have a physical copy of because I borrowed it from my school library. So The Bell Jar documents the life of a young woman called Esther Greenwood and her descent into mental illness in like 1950s, 1960s America. For me, The Bell Jar is one of those books that you always hear about and you always see, but you never actually get around to reading it. But I did get around to reading it this month and I thought it was really enjoyable. I found the way that Plath wrote The Bell Jar to be really haunting. Esther's mental illness really creeps up on her, and it's something that kind of happens slowly and as the result of several little things in her life as opposed to just one overriding thing. And because of that, when it reaches its sort of worst moments, it is shocking because you're so immersed in the story and in the narration that you realise but you don't realise, if that makes any sense at all. It's not implicitly stated until later on in the book, and it's chilling. Yes, I really loved that kind of writing style and the slow build of it. And my only criticism is that I felt as though I didn't really have enough closure when reading this book. I felt like it was a bit too short for me to really kind of have a good feel of the ending and feel satisfied with the ending. But that is just me personally, and I think a lot of people would disagree with that opinion. I really just think it depends on how you read it. But I did love the book and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read this month was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. So The Shadow of the Wind is magical realism, which is a genre that I've never really picked up before and I really wanted to, and I'm so glad I did. The Shadow of the Wind is set in Barcelona in like the shadow of the Civil War, and it follows this young boy called Daniel who on his 10th birthday is instructed by his father to pick a book from this massive room of book things, and he picks a book called The Shadow of the Wind by Julian Carax. And essentially Daniel becomes completely immersed and interested in the world of The Shadow of the Wind and in the works of the author and the author Julian Carax himself. And there's mystery and romance and suspense, and it's just wonderful. What really struck me about this book was the prose and the storytelling in particular. Carlos Ruiz Zafón writes beautifully, and the way that he threaded and kind of just crafted this story, it felt like a story that was crafted, I think is the right word, was really amazing. My only real criticism here is that I do feel like it sometimes veered a little bit towards the melodramatic, which isn't really my thing. But other than that, I thought that he told a really beautiful story in a really interesting setting. I never read books set in Spain, and I love Spanish and culture, so it was really interesting to be able to read that, especially in the historical period that it's set in. But yeah, I love this book and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read this month is one that so many people have been on at me to read, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I'm assuming that a lot of you have either read this or been told to read it by someone because it is so popular, but in case you haven't, a sort of brief outline of the plot is that it was a man called Kavoth, and it essentially is him telling his story over the course of 3 days, and this is going to be a trilogy, so book 1 is the first day of his storytelling, and it just sort of follows him from his childhood through his rise to kind of infamy. And that is a really bad synopsis, but I honestly don't want to spoil anything because I think this is the sort of book that you just have to read and appreciate for yourself. I absolutely love this book. I just feel like Patrick Rothfuss took so much time in developing every single aspect of his world and his characters until they just felt so real. Like, honestly, this world and its systems made so much sense. I was genuinely surprised that they didn't exist. I at least felt like they could exist, you know, they could conceivably exist. And Roth himself was a really interesting narrator. He's got just that sort of right amount of snark and mystery for me to be really drawn into him, and the other characters in this book were also really likeable. But really what drew me into this, like with The Shadow in the Wind, was the storytelling. I really love books where you get to spend a large amount of time with your narrator, and what's so great about The Name of the Wind is that you get to see Kvoth all the way from childhood to adulthood, and you kind of just get to see his character develop, and it's so addictive, and so good. Definitely one of my favourite fantasy books that I've read this year, and because of that I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars and a very high recommendation. And the final book I read this month was Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. This is a memoir which I saw recommended on the booktube channel Peruse Project, and I have been looking for more memoirs to read this year for a really long time, so I was super excited when I saw this one on sale on the Book Depository. So Jenny Lawson herself kind of describes this book more as a collection of thoughts than a collective novel, and I think that's a really good way to describe it. But essentially it follows our author Jenny Lawson and her everyday life and experiences with mental illness, but it tells it in a way that's so incredibly funny and truthful. Throughout this book she kind of has this philosophy of being furiously happy, and it's a philosophy that I really loved reading about in this book, and one that I really think I should probably employ in my own life because it just sounds really rewarding and fulfilling. And just in general, it was such a funny, quirky read about mental illness and family. And my only real criticism about this book is because it was more kind of a disjointed collection of thoughts, there were times when I found it quite easy after finishing a chapter just to put it down and not pick it up for a few days, which kind of meant that I took a long time to read it. But in general, I did love what I read, and for that I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so there you have it. Those are all the books I read in March 2016. I would love to know what books you read this month, so leave a comment down below. But until next time, goodbye.